Thank you, Linda, and thank you so much for this opportunity. The feeling's mutual. We had so much fun, and I so enjoyed all of our conversations that we had with our colleagues and friends through Lead In and otherwise. And you guys, I am just so excited to be here. There is so much, I have so much information to share with you. So I've got about 375 slides. So just be prepared for that. Just take what feels natural. If you're anything like me, your tendency is to try to write every single thing down. And I just want you to kind of be present and absorb what you feel called to do so, right? So to express some vulnerability. This is the first time that I'm sharing this particular set of information and presentation. So bear with me as I stumble through it a little bit. There's a lot of graphics. So if anybody has any trouble seeing the font, or you'd like a simplified version of the text or the PowerPoint, just let me know and I can send you that. There are going to be some opportunities to take some reflections. So if you would, please get a paper and a pen out handy. If you prefer to, type out your notes, that's fine too. But again, what I'm hoping to do is to model the fostering of your inner teacher and your inner wisdom. So I'm going to be helping you do that through the content, but it's going to have so much that I just take notes in little bits. Write a word, write a few words. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed and overthink any reflections. We're also going to be using an interactive tool called AHA Slides. If you want to use your phone, you can use the QR code, but we'll pop the link in the chat because I know pulling out your phone can be distracted. So we'll get started. So what I'm using today as a model for discussion is for those of you that are familiar with appreciative inquiry, we're going to kind of walk through the process together of defining, discovering, dreaming, designing, and identifying our destiny. So who am I? So I live in South Minneapolis on the unceded or stolen land of the Ojibwe and Dakota Nation. Um, what what I can share is that I'm really guided by love, community, fairness, wholeheartedness, and an energetic desire to feel and promote belonging. When I say feel belonging, I'm telling you seriously that I want to be wanted and loved, and that feeling of belonging, it's part of my essence of who I am. Not everybody has a strong feeling of that but having known that about myself puts me in a much better situation in times of stress and toxicity. I'm a social worker by training and by practice. I identify as a connector, a poet, a researcher, an educator, a deep listener. That's one of my favorite things to do. Organizer and an explorer of really anything out there that's remotely interesting. And professionally, I am just so passionate about nourishing and developing caretakers and change makers. And the people here, I'm sensing, I'm sort of getting the sense that you're here because you are pouring out everything that you have to give to the people in your life and your world and your work. And I would love to nourish and develop all of you in a way that is meaningful. And lastly, I'm a girl mom. So I've got two girls and they light up my life, but also they inspire me to be a better woman every day. I hear that sounding cliche coming out of my mouth, but it really is sincere. But first, a poem. So I'm going to read a poem that I wrote specifically for y'all, and it's titled Where Lives the Sanctuary? Get it pulled up. We bleed productivity. We strive, push through, strain, regain, and muster on and on. Where lives the sanctuary? We're drawn to the light, yet we comfort our souls in the tortured, shadowy blanket of more, more, more. deeper, harder, push through. Perfectionism will guide us. But where lives the sanctuary? The liberation we seek is caught in a wildfire so contagious its freedom is burdened by the weight of air. Air? Air. Driving forward in spaces we seek peace lives a cacophony of paradoxes so perplexing they drown us, yet somehow they elevate us. Where lives the sanctuary? Examine inward, then outward, spiraling force within us. We witness and caress, yet toss aside despair and courage, service and dominance, pain and forgiveness, fear and confidence. Ah, there it is, where it's always been. The temple in which we live, residing within, cultivating the space, the belovedness, the peace, the liberation, the intention we seek, shocking our veiled soul. There lives the sanctuary, not forcing tumultuous chaos, rather beckoning, striving toward clarity and contentment in the sovereignty and sacred solitude of our own hearts. Our own heart, your own heart. So I'm going to pause just for a moment to concretize this metaphorical experience that we've had of what we is called as a third thing, which we'll talk a bit more about later. But it's this feeling of transcendence or being taken somewhere through arts, movement, etc. And just take one moment to write down one word or two words about your current feeling. What was going through your mind as you were hearing the poem? And how did it feel in your body and in your heart and in your spirit? So just jot down one or two words. Okay. So how did we get here? We're talking about belonging and burnout. So why are we talking about this? Why is this such an important issue? So let's examine some objective truth around this. So I like to start, with the context, with the historical context specifically. There's a cultural paradigm, right, that has fed into today's workplace standards and conditions. And that's what we're all living and experiencing. That, holds true, and we experience that through structural governance, like policies, and human wiring. We're literally conditioned, right? And our bias and expectations are formed through this paradigm. And it's rooted in antiquated dominant culture. And this is just the facts. We are sort of hailing from this industrial age and military customs. Oh, I've realized that's spelled wrong. So we have, in the industrial age, it sparks, the machinist mentality and efficiency over efficacy, quantity over quality, and military customs. So I thought, I did some research on this, really interesting, right? So it's a lot of our sort of standard command and control and this hierarchy scheme that just seems normal, really is rooted in old, not old, but when there were so many people in the military back when the workforce sort of standards started to come alive. And we hear this in words like frontline and chain of command, which are just sort of a standard tongue, right, in work. And we have to talk about, these, sort of intertwined systems of white supremacy and patriarchy, right? They're not easy systems to talk about, but we have to talk about it. White supremacy culture and the industrial complex have standardized whiteness. It's maintaining a status quo and defensiveness. And this is where all the discomfort comes from, is because this is just what feels sort of like expected and normal. But that's also where the scarcity mindset is rooted in. Perfectionism, the sense of urgency of we got to get it done right now, right now, right now, which is why we're also stressed all the time, right? And the self-interest over service, this competition, relying on others instead of ourselves. And the objectivity. So you'll find me sort of honing in on some of the emotional piece because I feel like that's what's missing. And I so appreciate you, Linda, for kind of calling that out in the beginning of our opening session today. But this objectivity, like work has to live without emotions, is rooted in patriarchy. And all of this is what kind of leads to a lot of toxicity in the workplace, like criticizing, complaining, comparing, and reinforcing unhealthy behavior patterns. These may be things that you're used to, right? So we perform to prove, right? So it's like this feeling like we have to just prove not just to others, but to ourselves that we're enough. Like if we're going to get this job done, then we're for sure worthy, right? Versus just knowing that we're enough, but this like performance piece. Also covering up our differences and nuances. And again, this piece of internal wisdom to instead, rely on others' expectations and just like cover it up, just like be a little bit less yourself because you don't want to fill in the blank, right? And meeting the demands at all costs, including our own and our family's well-being. I know that resonates. And then you add in current stressors. We're in this space of that urgency I mentioned, right? Like the scarcity of resources or it's an observed scarcity, right? Sometimes it's real, and a lot of times it's real, but it's not always real. But to do more with less, we're in obviously like two major public health crises. The pandemic, we have to recognize that, as well as the ongoing effects of intergenerational trauma caused by racism. This is it seems like it's happening more, but we're just talking about it more. It's now sort of like accumulating, right? Because of the intergenerational piece of it. And we're moving so fast. The increased speed of technology and knowledge. Did you guys know this is crazy? Human knowledge doubles every 12 hours. Doesn't that stress you out just thinking about it? That's crazy. Because we're always like, oh, I don't want to be the last one. Like I gotta learn, I gotta learn, I gotta know, I gotta do, right? And the mental health crisis. So here's just some numbers about what's kind of happening. So, our nation's experiencing exacerbation of mental health crisis, with a whopping 42% of people experiencing a decline in mental health since the pandemic. And resources are ever more underfunded. So these are some of the results. And that's this is what's promoting our isolation and our burnout, the inequities, declined health and well-being. I mean, there's stats. I could spend 30 minutes just on each one of these sort of squares, right? But by conforming with this antiquated paradigm that doesn't serve us, we sort of lose. We sort of lose.
Perfect. Okay, I'm in. Thank you so much. All right, have a good day.
Yes, you too.
Thanks.
We have somebody chatting. Do you want to chat with me? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. So we have so I'll just focus on a couple of these. So, by living fractured lives, what does that mean? So we spend a third of our work or a third of our life at work, right? And so fractured lives is like an example of that is, when we're growing up, we teach children and we teach our just like our families around the value of kindness, of love, nurturing, the golden rule, all of these things. And we're just like, we strive so hard to like get our children to believe in these virtues and act them out. And then they graduate high school and then they go into the workforce. And then it's like, it's not really that important, right? Like what happened? Where, why do we have this gap? right? And that leads to stress, that sort of dissonance in that gap. And we tend to lose ourselves in that space, and it leads to stress. And also self-awareness atrophy. That whole, if we're not learning to rely on ourselves, we're relying on others. And that's where a lot of that, like, you needing praise to feel like you are enough. So, if we were to hone in on self-awareness, right, like we would have a better understanding of when our intentions don't always meet our actions. Anyway, I'll move on, but the loss of kind of internal and collective power uh, results in or suffering of our performance and our communities. It's just like this accumulative experience. Now, that's a bleak situation, right? So that was a very bleak situation. So now we're going to kind of go into that sort of squishy reflection middle. We're going to spend some time together and do a little bit of kind of thinking about what's beyond that, right? So the first step is going to be kind of thinking through what part of what you already mentioned, maybe in your early group, but what would you like to grow or change in your organization as it relates to burnout or belonging? If one of my friends could post in the chat the link, or you can scan your phone or use your phone to scan the QR code, or you can go in there on your own. You should be able to find it. And I'm going to share my screen. So all of your answers are anonymous. So as you can see, the first one, doesn't connect to a name or anything. So we're just going to spend maybe a minute on this. So just try to keep your answers concise so that we can see as many as possible. Just put in the first thing that comes to mind.
I put the link in the chat. Let me know if it doesn't work, you guys. Thanks.
Talk about our feelings more, increasing safety of and within expressing feelings. Yeah. So far, there's a theme. We'll see how it continues. Boosting personal self-worth, knowing they're enough. It's okay to put work down. A lot of people are always on now that things are more virtually geared. So true. It's so stressful. Ask powerful questions to determine needs. Yes. I need to keep moving a little bit, so I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds if anybody wants to pop in anything. Otherwise, it's a great start. Structure at work to connect people, have them know each other and build relationships. Yes. Feeling comfortable, safe, expressing feelings. Y'all, did you plan this? Because I feel like you sort of knew what I was going to be talking about today. Honor our past emotional debt. Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, I got to keep moving, but that's very good. Thank you for participating. You can continue to pop those in if you'd like, and I'll pull it up again in a little bit. Okay. So we're going to move on to discovering. So I want you guys to think through in your own bodies and experiences, the experience of thriving. How does it feel to you? I think when it sort of honors our empathetic side, if we can start to really feel and imagine what it's like in our own life, we can help to support that in others. So here's a reflection. This is going to, I'd like you to just take a moment and bring out whatever your documenting tool and think about, when have you really experienced the feeling of thriving and belonging at work? Like when you were like, oh, this felt so good in my body. I was a whole, I was honored and valued. So what did it feel like in your body, in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit? What were the conditions? Who supported you? In what ways did they support you? What did that support feel like? And what was the environment like? And what was the leadership dynamic that may have supported or not supported it? So I'm just going to give you a minute to just jot down a few notes. You don't have to write out paragraphs unless that feels good to you. Okay, so harness that feeling, and we're going to go back to this. So this is going to be a quick poll. So considering the last 5 years, how often have you felt this sense of thriving at work? So how often have you experienced this? Let's take a little poll. So if you can go back into ahaslides.com and take a little vote. Is this a common experience? Do you have a lot of so far?
And if people are having trouble accessing, I put the link in again. It looks like there's a limit on the number of people that can be in. So
Oh,
do as you're
serious?
doing. Yeah, I'm not sure, but
Oh,
do as
shoot.
you're doing. You guys just put it in the chat. If it's not letting you type it in the poll. Or maybe
Well,
there's a
sorry.
50-person limit or something, Molly. I'm not sure, but it's okay.
Huh. Well, apologies on my end then. Okay, so occasionally or very little. Not very often. Okay. So we're going to keep moving on. So it's more along the lines of very little or occasionally on a regular basis. Okay. So what if we were to imagine a new future, right? What does that look like? Let's take a minute to dream a little bit. We're going to go back to the reflection again. This is the sort of soft, gooey inside, right? And then we're going to get to some suggestions in a little bit. So go into your reflection space, right? I'm going to give you a little bubbly support. Imagine what might happen if we fostered self-love, self-acceptance, and self-belonging in the workplace. What if we reprioritize development of our inner teacher over only relying on external wisdom? What if all workplaces were healing centered and every employee had what they needed to thrive at work? What if we had a strong sense of awareness of our values and our souls, and we're encouraged to live and work in alignment with them every day? What if everyone felt seen, whole, and valued at work? What might happen? What that might look like, feel like? Jot down just a few notes, thoughts. Just allow yourself to do a little bit of dreaming. Permission to explore. All right. Got a few notes. This is the last one. So I'm going to put up our slides once again. And what is your greatest hope? And I'll just leave this up for a second and then share the poll results in a minute. Or not poll, it's another open-ended one. What is your greatest hope? And of course, keep it relevant to our topic, but what is your greatest hope for work as it relates to belonging and thriving and well-being at your particular agency or organization or all of them? I'll leave this back up for just a second. Share your greatest hope. What does it look like? And you can just put in 1 or 2 words. To be fully human at work. That's great. I love that. Isn't it almost feels like an ironic statement that we even have to make that claim, right? I am going to leave that up. And we do need to keep moving, but because I want to get to some of the meat. But feel free to add in, and then we can look back at it in a minute, that I can be seen as a whole real person, not just as a woman or a blank something. Genuine and real connections and purpose at work to feel valued. You guys are not asking too much. This is your greatest hope. That is not too much to ask, I promise. Okay, so let's talk about changing with soul. Let us design a new cultural paradigm based on a culture of care and trust and create alignment across the organization. what might that look like? What are some steps we could take? So what I am really strongly passionate about is establishing a set of guiding principles. I know that a lot of folks have code of ethics and you have values, but in what ways are you using them every day to sort of kind of build in? So I am a huge proponent of using everything that we want to see happen at work, build it in. It should be incorporated, and your values should kind of flow, or your principles, or your could be considered values. But I don't use the word values because a lot of folks already have that, and you can use them. But how are you incorporating that into your everyday decision making, in supporting a culture that you truly want, that really does make that impact? So how can you embed it into your organizational strategy, into your evaluation practices, and integration of your well-being hopes? And then thinking about, what does it look like? So those examples and sort of metaphors and behaviors for, like, a principal example might be, giving people the tool of, when they're caught in a crossfire between somebody. Can you help me understand more about where you're coming from and what I might be missing about your perspective? Or using Kim Scott's purple flag. And that's a whole nother topic. We won't get into it, but for those of you who are familiar. And caring is an abundant resource. I feel like this is sort of news to so many people at work, right? Caring scarcity is an enemy. And why do we value nurturing and caring so much at home, right? Like, we couldn't make humans, we couldn't develop humans without that love and nurturing and caring space. But then we have to turn it off when we go into the workplace. So why do we have this dissonance and this inequity? Um, so identify what success looks like and include it as a measurement of your organizational goals. This is another way to build it in sustainably instead of an extra program. And I'm not saying that as a criticism of any individuals that may be here as a wellness program representative, but what might it look like if it was built in? So if we were to rethink our purpose, an example might be, so if what would it look like if your age, or what would you like your agency's obituary to read, right? So, like, let's say organization QRP just got hit by a bus, right? So, like, they didn't go under, nothing bad happened to them other than this freak accident. But what do you want people to say about what it was like to work with your organization, right? Like, what would your obituary read, and or your eulogy even? And I think just like, what do you want your essence of your organization? It's not just about, or is it? Maybe it is, right? Like, we have the numbers and we have the outputs, but is that the only point? Like, what's the most important thing? And some considerations might be to ask your employees and leaders what they need to thrive and build it into your organizational goals and measure those goals. Busy proof it. So, like, oh, we got too busy, things got too hairy. Slow down to increase effectiveness and well-being. At what cost is it worth prioritizing the outputs of your organization? At what cost? This is a busy screen, I realize. This, again, I could spend a whole 3 hours just on this. This is, I think, is a real key to kind of where we are now to where we could be going. So awaken and nurture inner wisdom and teacher to support greater purpose and meaning. So there's so much meaning and purpose that can come from really knowing ourselves. But how can you embed that process of nurturing your employees' inner wisdom at work? And doing so not just in individual reflections, but in community. It's both and. It's this experience of, like, we need to do some internal kind of digging and excavating, but we need to have an opportunity to share it with people. That's where we sort of get our identity and where we know what feels right when we say it out loud. And I cannot say this enough, but we need time and space for rest, for grieving, for recalibration and reflection at work. At work. Complete the stress cycle. For anybody that's familiar with Emily and Amelia Nagoski and their work, right? Completing the stress cycle of, if we're burning our wick, we're getting we're getting stressed, and then we hit our threshold, and then we have this sort of anxious yuckiness inside us, and then we go on to the next one, and then we fill up, and that's how we get burnt out. But when we expound, when we express, when we get all that out, and they say the best way to do it is through physical movement, but you can do it through other things like the third things, using arts and movement and expression, and you can do this at work. We can do it at work. So there's also forms of peer coaching circles that can also double as connection builders, using self-guided assessments, exercises, workshops. I mean, again, I could go on and on about this piece, but I'll move on. And also, let's hire, recognize, promote, and invest in empathetic leaders. Empathetic leaders who model belonging, well-being, service, trust, and belief in the capacity of others. And you can, going back to your principles and your organizational strategy that incorporates and integrates your well-being goals, hire the people who are emulating that, invest in them, develop them, give them what they need to thrive, foster their moral credibility over getting the task complete. And leadership, empathetic leadership is shown to be the most important skill in today's workforce. The most important skill. It promotes not just the well-being, but also performance, because people can't perform when they're struggling. And somebody already mentioned this in our AHA slides, but build in time and space for connection, friendship, relationship building. We need to give permission and provide intentionality, because otherwise it just won't happen, right? And it may happen, but people may feel guilt about it. Some people don't feel comfortable. There's research out there that shows that there's actually a good amount of adults who don't know how to build healthy relationships, that don't know where to do it at work, right? That they're sort of either lacking in the skill, the space, the support to do it. And I'm just going to say this thing, right? So have you guys been in that moment where you feel like you need to sneak away to connect with your colleagues on a personal level just to keep you going during the day? I don't know about you, but I've been in that moment where I'm like, I am going to blow up and I have to sneak away. It feels like I'm sneaking away, but that's the one thing that keeps me going and getting me completed, or that helps me complete my tasks. Otherwise, I just sort of explode. And I am a super confident, well, more or less confident human, and assert, and I'm just like, I need this, I'm gonna go do it. But everybody operates differently. So what if we just built it in? Like, this is connection space and time. It just, people don't stay if they don't have connections with the people, and they have a way less purpose and meaning at work. And therefore they're gonna just leave. Let me say, critique and resist centering and promoting whiteness. Let me say it again. Critique and resist centering and promoting whiteness. And one thing that you can ask, your leadership should be asking, in what ways are or might we be doing this? And what can we do about it? This is so critical to belonging. And if we're not asking ourselves this question, we're just assuming that we're not promoting whiteness. I highly encourage you to be asking this question. And in this specific case, it is urgent. Elevate and thinking. So people latch on to division because it provides an easy explanation. We know this, right? It's sort of a standard. We always talk about what's happening in politics and what's going on. But things like identity, right, are not one or the other. We don't live in categories, that it's not a way to live with integrity. So the power of duality can be transformational. And I know, and thinking it does not come naturally or easily to a lot of folks. It takes some practice. But leave space for that ambiguity where both two ideas can be true at the same time. Okay, I know I'm getting close on time, over time. So I'm just going to wrap up real quickly with a couple things. Trust employees, ask them. Chaos is not inevitable and expansion is likely. Start with you, model what you want to see. It's really inspiring. Trust is also very inspiring and it's all contagious. So make one word. How do you feel called to move from where you are now toward a future that you'd be proud of? Just write down one quick thing. There's so many things that I just spewed off at you, and they're not going to feel right for everybody. So just take a moment to write something down that's in your mind. Where do you feel called? So, toward our future, let us move beyond our barriers, right? Because I know this is how you're feeling right now. Like, no, this is impossible, or there's going to be so much tension. I know that feeling of tension. So this is the last thing that really I'll say. You're probably thinking we have unwilling leadership, not enough time, not enough money. There's too much fear and a loss of control to embed any of these practices. But take a moment, and not right now because we don't have time, and I knew that we weren't going to have time for this, but list all your obstacles, circle what's within your control, and think about how you can overcome them and what strengths you can draw upon to do so when you have a moment. So I believe in your inner wisdom. Who loves Ted Lasso? I'll just say that. I believe in y'all. Okay, here's my references. I'm sorry for going over. I promised Linda I would only maybe be 5 minutes, and I was over that, and I'm
Nope.
sorry.
You're
Thank
actually
you.
good. You have another 2 minutes, Molly, so you're good.
Okay, you let me start early, so I appreciate that. So here's my references. This is a little nod to a dear friend of mine, Amelia Brown, who lived in the city of Minneapolis, or worked at the city of Minneapolis, and was one of my best friends, who passed. And without telling you her whole entire story, I'll just tell you that it's dedicated to her. And she says, "You have so much to say and share. You have insights and life experience that are important. You have lessons to share that will benefit others. You are enough." All right, that's it.
Right, well, yes, please show your appreciation in the chat. Anything, and we will stop the recording.